let's go back in time a little bit and go back to the Great Depression. We'll start with this one right here. We're at history.com. What's this called? Great Depression history. The Great Depression was the worst economic downturn in the history of the industrialized world, lasting from the stock market crash of 1929 to 1939. So the stock market crash is kind of what kicked off the Great Depression. But I say kind of because, well, there were the things that led into the stock market crash, and then there were the things that caused those things that led into the stock market crash. So you can kind of look at it as like, yeah, the stock market crash caused the Great Depression, but there were actually things in place to cause the stock market crash, which, yes, in turn would cause the Great Depression. So I want to jump to this section right here, what caused the Great Depression. So throughout the 1920s, and basically what I'm going to kind of suggest here is that the 1920s, that decade, is basically the last decade for us. So the 1920s was the 2010 through 2020 era, like wrapping that up kind of right now. So it says throughout the 1920s, the U.S. economy expanded rapidly, and the nation's total wealth more than doubled between 1920 and 1929, a period dubbed the Roaring Twenties. And we see basically that exact same thing having happened the last decade, just tremendous growth, and we're seeing that right now. What I'm going to suggest is actually we're nearing the peak of that growth before it really crashes and collapses. The stock market, centered at the New York Stock Exchange on Wall Street, was the scene of reckless speculation where everyone from millionaire tycoons to cooks and janitors poured their savings into stocks. What's happening right now? Everybody's pouring their money into stocks. Everybody's listening to the YouTubers talk about stocks. Stocks are going up, 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 up. So everybody's pouring their money into stocks, trying to make some money, from the millionaire tycoons all the way down to janitors. As a result, the stock market underwent rapid expansion, reaching its peak in August 1929. Now, we'll flash back to these graphs a little bit more, but here's a peek at the graph that we're looking at. So right here in 1929, it peaked September, not 5th, maybe the 5th, right in there though. It peaked, and then it had a big crash, and then it continued and continued and continued to crash almost basically to zero. So right when things were looking really good, things were going up, 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 when it was undergoing rapid expansion, reaching its peak, that's when it crashed. Now there is all that, which I think is a very strong argument, but this is really where I'm looking at it and going, this is really what's going to drive us into the crash and into a depression here. It says, by then, production had already declined and unemployment has risen. What has been happening? Production has been declining and unemployment has been rising. And that's going to continue to happen. Stock prices were much higher, come on, highlight, were much higher than their actual value. Also happening right now. Additionally, wages at that time were low. I think it's fair to say that wages right now are fairly low. Consumer debt was proliferating. Yes, big yes to that. For everything from credit card debt to loan, what do you call them? College loan debt, to housing debt, to business debt. The agricultural sector of the economy was struggling due to drought and falling food prices. I'm not sure we fully feel the effects of this one yet. I think it's coming. I think we've got to wait a little bit of time here. But the agricultural sector has already significantly been impacted from the lockdowns, supply chain, and then I don't know if it's anywhere out of the necessarily normal, but there have been storms that wiped, like a hurricane hit Iowa, mid-America, a hurricane hit it and hit just straight farms there. So like stuff like that has been happening again. I don't think we're fully feeling the food struggle quite yet, but I do think that is being lined up to happen. And then banks had an excess of large loans that could not be liquidated. That's definitely going to happen. Like everybody's on loans right now. Everybody's extended on loans. The American economy entered a mild recession during the summer of 1929 as consumer spending slowed and unsold goods began to pile up, which in turn slowed factory production. Okay, what just happened in 2020? exactly that. We hit a little bit of a recession, things slowed for a little bit. Nonetheless, right here, stock prices continued to rise. Same thing that's happening right now. And by the fall of that year had reached stratospheric levels that could not be justified by expected future earnings. Exactly what's happening right now. We are at stratospheric levels. Let me show you. Let's jump to this graph. Nope, this one. This is the most all-time I could get right here. I think it's pretty much up to date, up to like the actual day. But look, this is the stratospheric madness that's happening right now. The stratospheric madness back here in the 30s doesn't even really register right here, because the overall worth of the market was so low at that time. And I mean, just look at the graph. That's stratospheric, and it's been really just this last year, and then really within the last like few years before that. But you can definitely look straight at 2020 and go up to right now and go, wow, the stock market has boomed out the wazoo. Now we start to look at, okay, stock market crash, that happened, bummer. What are the consequences of that? What's life look like now? As consumer confidence vanished in the wake of the stock market crash, and I'm saying, if I'm saying I think a crash is coming now, this is also what I'm saying is coming after the crash. As consumer confidence vanished in the wake of the crash, the downturn in spending and investment led factories and other businesses to slow production and begin firing their workers. We've already seen that happening in I'm going to say small degree compared to this, but it's already been happening in a degree that's ridiculous, should not be happening. But in the after post stock market crash, it's going to get a lot worse. For those who were lucky enough to remain employed, wages fell and buying power decreased. Meaning you're making less money and the money that you have buys you less. Many Americans were forced to buy on credit, which means they fell into debt, and the number of foreclosures and repossessions climbed steadily. Meanwhile, the country's industrial production had dropped by half. I mean, we don't produce that much even right now, but what we do produce is definitely becoming a lot less. Breadlines, soup kitchens, rising numbers of homeless people became more and more common. I mean, we're seeing people go homeless, and this is like before anything's even crashed, and I'm saying stuff's gonna crash, and then this is gonna get a lot worse. Okay, in the fall of 1930, first four waves of banking panic begins as large number of investors lost confidence in the solvency of their banks and demand deposits in cash, forcing banks to liquidate loans in order to supplement their insufficient cash reserves on hand. So basically what that means is a bunch of people started getting worried about the banks failing, so they went in to get all their cash out of their bank, which means the banks had to liquidate loans in order to give cash to those people. Bank runs swept the United States again in the spring and fall of 1931 and 32, and by 33, thousands of banks had closed their doors. Banks are going to close. In the face of this dire situation, Hoover's administration tried supporting failing banks and other institutions with loans. Just give them money. Just give them money. The idea was that the banks in turn would loan to businesses, which would be able to hire back their employees. All right, Roosevelt elected. Let's get a new president in here. Roosevelt took immediate action to address the country's economic woes, first announcing a 4-day bank holiday, cute little phrase, during which all banks would close so that Congress could pass reform legislation and reform those banks determined to be sound. So basically shut everything down, all of it, so that government could come together and create all the new banking stuff that they wanted to create. Kind of sounds a little bit like a great financial reset or something like that. I don't know. So we've got everything's looking great, everything's booming, but we've got those little problems tucked inside there. Everything's on loan, unemployment's going down, production's not happening, but everything's booming, going up, and then boom, crash. And then what happens because of crash? Great Depression. And money gets messed up. And yes, very much, mostly, where it was most felt was probably in the United States, but that trickled and had effect throughout all the world, which played its part into now creating and entering us into World War II. Depression-era hardships had fueled the rise of extremist political movements in various European countries, most notably that of Adolf Hitler's Nazi regime in Germany. Interestingly enough, there seems to be a similar regime breaking out right now worldwide. I don't know. Kind of maybe looks that way. The Great Depression had ended at last, and the United States turned its attention to the global conflict of World War II. So here's that graph again of like 1925 to 1934, roughly. And then here's, let's go past 5 years here. max. So here's a look, this graph right here from roughly 1990 to today, and you see it's just been, I mean, right here we're hitting a big old stratospheric spike right here. How long it'll continue, tough to say, but it does look like, you know, like we're seeing right here. Before the crash, a period of phenomenal growth. Economic growth was created in an environment. That economic growth created an environment in which speculating in stocks became almost a hobby. General population wanted a piece of the market. That's happening right now. Overproduction and oversupply. That's been happening. Excess debt. That's definitely been happening. All the pieces. Switch of presidency. That just like all the pieces look like they're there.